Ladies and gentlemen, I now welcome to the stage Stuart Force. Stuart is here tonight to present this evening's second Scoop Jackson Distinguished Service Award to Sander Gerber for his championing work of the Taylor-Force Act, which would cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority unless and until it ends its institutionalized payments, of over $300 million annually to terrorists. Stuart is here with his wife, Robbie Force.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To the host committee of the awards dinner and the staff of JINSA, Robbie and I offer our appreciation for your gracious hospitality on this special occasion. We also offer our congratulations to the evening's honorees and a special thank you to the recipients of the 2017 Grateful Nation Award. Robbie and I were at Fort Hood each time our son Taylor and his Army unit returned from combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. After asking the usual dumb parent questions, how was the food and are you glad to be home, we asked how the mission had gone. Invariably, Tay said, great, the NCOs and the soldiers in my unit were terrific. During his 5 years of active duty, he continually praised the courage and professionalism of the troops under his command. Speaking for myself, Taylor, Robbie, and Kristen, our daughter, Taylor's sister, and best friend, we are truly grateful for your service in defense of the United States. Sander Gerber first reached out to us in an email on July 4th, 2016, 4 months after we lost Taylor in a terrorist stabbing in Jaffa, Israel. In it, he expressed his condolences and offered to talk with us at any time. I didn't know who Sander was, but as our children have always told us, there's no reason to not know anything in today's day. So I Google searched and discovered that Sander, amongst other things, is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School with honors, and that he and his company, Hudson Bay Capital, are successful and well-respected members of the financial community in New York City. Leaving my very small comfort zone, I called Sander. The next thing we knew, we were here in Washington with Sander many times, and usually with several of his favorite children, meeting with legislators and administration officials to promote Senator Lindsey Graham's sponsored legislation, the Taylor-Force Act. As I will admit to anyone, Sander did the heavy lifting. Our role was to simply put a face with the paperwork, but Sander dedicated his time, his energy, and his resources to educating legislators and the public and to gathering support for the Act's passage. The Act has bipartisan support because it is the right thing to do, and we are hopeful it will be signed into law during the current session of Congress. A year and a half ago, Sander offered us the opportunity to focus on accomplishing something that could have a positive effect in Israel and in the Middle East. Little did Robbie and I know that our new friendship with the Gerbers, Sander, his wonderful wife, Tracy, and their 7 favorite children would have such an impact on our own lives. Let me share one quick example. On one of our trips to New York City to promote the Act's passage, Sander and Tracy welcomed us into their home on a Friday evening to observe and celebrate the most important night of the Jewish week. This was our first experience with the Jewish Sabbath, an experience we will never forget. They patiently explained the customs and traditions and guided us through a wonderful evening of prayer, blessings, singing, feasting, and fellowship with their family and friends. That Friday night was uplifting and calming at the same time. Thank you again for that much-needed special time. As I introduce Sander, let me offer 2 recommendations to everyone. First, if during a conversation he offers you an opportunity to become involved in a project or a cause, sign on. You can be assured that his priorities are the same as Taylor's work. God and family first, himself last. Second, when you do sign on, pack a backpack with an energy drink and running shoes. You'll need both to keep up. It is my pleasure and truly an honor to introduce our friend, Mr. Sander Gerber.
That was quite an introduction. I'm not used to that, frankly. And hope I don't get an introduction like that again. Ever since Bryna put me and the forces together, things have changed for my family. We truly have seen how people can take a tragic loss and develop the resolve to transform that loss into something that can have a positive impact. The Talmud teaches us that you do a bad deed, it leads to another bad deed. You do a good deed, it leads to another good deed. Here they've done something that is really outside the ordinary, which is to take a bad deed and transform it into something good. And that good has impacted my family, from my wife Tracy to my children that are all here, except for one that's studying in Jerusalem. We all love the forces, and they've really been an inspiration to the family. I'm also happy to say that my parents are here. I know this is not usual for Washington dinners, that the parents and the kids come, but what the heck, I'm not a Washingtonian. And frankly, I don't deserve this podium, because in comparison to the servicemen who are being honored and our congressional leaders, I really don't stand, it's not appropriate for me to be here, but Mike is a very good friend, and in addition to being an outstanding leader for JINSA, he bakes a great trout. And he and Natalie had me over for dinner, and their daughter Sophia is very cute, no offense, princesses. And he said, "You gotta be honored." And I said, no. And he said, the reason why you have to be honored is because in the audience will be a lot of military men, and they need to know what happened to Captain Taylor Force. And I see now from the audience that this is a very high-powered, influential audience, and I think it's very important for people to know. Why? Why do people need to know? Because despite the obsessive media focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, few people knew one of the most important facts about the conflict: that the Palestinian Authority has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the bank accounts of terrorists and their families as a reward for violence. Yes, it's hard to believe, but you heard that right. The Palestinian Authority enacted legislation in 2004 to formalize, to institutionalize pensions for knifing, for car ramming. My wife mentioned the car ramming yesterday in our hometown. Imagine payments by law for bombings, payments for shootings. We call it pay to slay. The Taylor Force Act would stop American taxpayer money from funding the Palestinian Authority until they revoked these laws and stopped the blood money from flowing. Now, many of us have known that the Palestinian Authority celebrates terrorists by naming streets, schools, sports teams, soccer tournaments. I saw a ping pong tournament also after terrorists. And it's known that the Palestinian Authority publishes textbooks teaching children to hate Jews. But frankly, for myself, it wasn't until late 2015 that I learned of their institutional support for violence. I was shocked. I thought it was a smoking gun. So I immediately contacted Jewish leaders, and I was told that everyone knows and nobody cares. Everybody knows and no one cares. But I didn't know, and I did care. But when I read about Taylor's murder, I couldn't sleep at night because Taylor was not an ordinary American. Taylor was an officer. He served tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was just walking down the street in Tel Aviv with his business school chums. The so-called martyr was hailed by the Palestinian Authority as a national hero. He was given a joyous state funeral that looked more like a street party. We have the video if you want to see it. The killer's family was rewarded with a pension subsidized by the United States taxpayer. My good friend Dan Coates, senator at the time, I have to give him a lot of credit because when I showed him the Palestinian Authority laws and showed him the budget of $315 million for that year to paying 33,000 terrorists and their families, Dan insisted that we have a moral imperative, that we all have a moral imperative to work to stop the payments and let the world know. In fact, he sent me a book, 1944, which goes through the history in the Roosevelt administration, how they weren't able to get around to bombing the train lines, the crematorium. He and Terry Snell helped to get things rolling, and I'm very happy that Marcia, his wonderful wife, is here to join us tonight. Then Ed Royce insisted on holding hearings in the House. Ed thought it was so important that beyond the hearings, he even then later walked Stuart, Robbie, and 4 of my daughters to see Senator Bob Corker. And I'll never forget the look of disbelief when I showed Senator Corker the PA laws and budget for terror. In New York City, a group calling itself the Manhattan Political Network also cared. Michael LaFell, who's a board member of JINSA, I don't know where Michael is now. Michael? He was part of the initial effort to educate members of Congress. John Kraushaar crafted the messaging Pay to Slay. He brought in Rick Reed, who produced a 2-minute video featuring Stuart and Robbie, and then David Brogue of Christians United for Israel built a website to host the video and activated his 3 million member email list. When Lindsey Graham saw this video, he turned red. He said it was the hand of God that the forces happened to be his constituents. And it was Lindsey's brilliant idea to name the bill the Taylor Force Act. Lindsey was here earlier this evening. Then Nathan Diamond and Yehuda Neuberger of the OU immediately signed on, as did Matt Brooks and Senator Norm Coleman of the Republican Jewish Coalition, David Aufhauser and Doug, and then David Feith. They all wrote about it. Articles in the Wall Street Journal, commentary, National Review. Max Neuberger and David Effoon offered their influential publications to further attract attention on the Taylor Force Act. Dan Schneider and Matt Schlapp, who I'm very happy are here, put the issue front and center at CPAC. Haim Saban and Howard Friedman and Rabbi Shem Tov, who gave the invocation tonight, helped to show Democrats that this was not a partisan issue. So I accept this award on behalf of the Taylor Force team. You can clap for that, please. Now, my friends, you would think that it would be overwhelmingly obvious that such a pay-to-slay policy embedded in PA law is wrong. But even more disturbing is that existing American law openly accepts that the American taxpayer helps to pay salaries to the killers. I'll quote the law from the appropriations law. The Secretary of State shall reduce the amount of assistance made available for the Palestinian Authority by an amount the Secretary determines is equivalent to the amount expended by the Palestinian Authority as payments for acts of terrorism by individuals who are imprisoned after being fairly tried and convicted for acts of terrorism. It's very precise. Acts of terrorism convicted by individuals who are in prison after being fairly tried and convicted, just so you know they're terrorists, and by individuals who died committing acts of terrorism during the previous calendar year. This is United States law saying that we are going to fund a terror-sponsoring entity because even if you take away some of the money, the remaining hundreds of millions of dollars still flows to the Palestinian Authority from the United States. My friends, how could the greatest nation on earth allow itself to subsidize terrorists? There is a false narrative that it is a necessary evil to continue to fund the Palestinian Authority, even with the payments to and glorification of terrorists, because without aid from the U.S., the PA government would collapse, and what would come next would be even worse. That argument's false. U.S. aid is less than 8% of the PA budget. It's not enough to cause a collapse. But using American taxpayer money to flood the PA bank accounts to support terrorism contradicts what Scoop Jackson advised. He said in a 1979 speech entitled "Terrorism as a Weapon in International Politics," there is a need, Senator Jackson said, there is a need for the U.S. to make careful decisions, stand by those decisions, and avoid sending false or conflicting signals. I think Scoop Jackson's moral realism dovetails with the President's vision of a foreign policy guided by principled realism. When we are ambiguous on our values, it undercuts the moral force of our legitimacy and leaves our allies to ponder, does America have your back when American taxpayers are funding terrorists to stab you in the back? The confusion is highlighted today with the comparison of Hamas to the Palestinian Authority. Common wisdom holds that because Hamas is a terrorist entity, we must support the PA. We talk about red lines for other countries' behavior, but U.S. foreign policy should also have its own red lines. There is no dotted line between a terror-sponsoring entity like the Palestinian Authority and a terrorist entity like Hamas. The two groups are joined by a red line of blood, the blood of Taylor and countless other Americans and Israelis. We should not be giving aid to terror-sponsoring entities. U.S. foreign aid should not cross that red line. I believe Scoop Jackson would agree with that, and I know that the people in this room do too. Violence by terrorists and from rogue regimes is only defeated when the people in this room continue to stand for policies that add to the strength of America's military and to the safety and security of our country and our closest allies, including Israel. But let me add, in the battle against terrorism, the first thing we need to do before sending in our brave soldiers is a willingness to face the truth. So I'd like to suggest to the leaders here today, you are leaders of the Congress, you are leaders of the military and the intelligence community. Help pivot U.S. policy, change the false narrative, change the incentives to terrorism baked into the Palestinian Authority's despicable laws. We should speak truth to terror and expose the Palestinian Authority as a sponsor of terrorism. It sounds dramatic. Thank you. It's dramatic enough for some applause. It is dramatic, but it's also plain. and obviously the truth. And I look forward to my friends Eliot Engel and Chairman Royce to completing the House markup of the Taylor Force Act. If not America, then who? If not now, then when? Thank you on behalf of the team to perpetuate the honored memory of Captain Taylor Force. Thank you to Mike McCuskey, JINSA, and its supporters. It's been a privilege to speak to you tonight. Thank you.